The boarding pass had barely warmed in her hand when the sentence sliced through the air like a blade. "Ma'am, I think you're in the wrong place. This section is not for you." No shouting, no raised voice, just a small tone, sharpened like cold steel, an insult wrapped in fake politeness, yet enough to make the entire first-class cabin turn and look in one direction. Eleanor Walker stopped. No frown, no blink, just stillness, a straight line of silence and wait. She looked at Melissa Hart as if she had just heard a line America had repeated countless times in countless forms. "You do not belong here." The stark white cabin light struck Eleanor's navy blue suit, highlighting every drop of calm falling through her eyes. She said nothing, but that silence, deep, heavy, honed by 70 years of being tested, made the entire row in front of her hold its breath. Natalie Walker, her granddaughter, stepped half a pace forward. She looked at Melissa the way one looks at a tiny spark in a dry forest, one more flicker away from becoming a roaring wildfire. But Natalie didn't extinguish it, not yet. The camera in the viewer's mind glides over Eleanor's shoulder, shooting into the first-class cabin, where white faces lift from financial newspapers, from champagne flutes, from sleek aluminum laptops. A flicker of curiosity, a flicker of expectation, a flicker of enjoyment at a familiar injustice. They thought they were witnessing an old story, a woman of color mistaken for someone who wandered into the wrong section, a small annoyance, a harmless misunderstanding, a scene they had watched so often it no longer registered as wrong. But today they had no idea they were standing in the opening frame of an explosion. Melissa's gaze swept over Eleanor from head to toe, blatant and clinical evaluating judging, shrinking an entire life into a single second of scrutiny. "Are you sure?" she asked, tilting her head, her smile cracking like cheap paint. "This is seat 2, A first class. It's expensive." A small tremor passed through Eleanor's body, not from the insult, she was far too familiar with those, but from exhaustion, the exhaustion of someone who had seen scenes like this her whole life, at banks, at airports, at conferences, in places where equality was supposed to be unquestioned. The exhaustion of knowing that the person causing the harm would believe this was normal. Eleanor extended her hand, placing the boarding pass in front of Melissa. A clean, precise, steady motion. 2A. Exactly as you said. But Melissa didn't look at the ticket. She looked at Eleanor. And that was the problem. Natalie took in the scene like a camera capturing micro details. Melissa's fingers tightening slightly around the tablet, her shoulders lifting in defensiveness, her cold eyes sliding over Eleanor, as if searching for an excuse to deny the truth right in front of her. The camera cuts to Eleanor's face, still expressionless, a vast sheet of ice, quiet, but dangerously cold. Natalie sensed the familiar shift. Eleanor's calm was preparing to transform from silence into authority, from patience into action. Melissa activated the scanner, gliding it lightly over the boarding pass. The moment it beeped the unmistakable sound of a valid check, the entire cabin realized who was wrong. Melissa pressed her lips together, her teeth clamped. A flicker of bitterness, a flicker of embarrassment, then a crooked smile to hide them. "Oh, looks like it's correct. It's just we don't often see." She let the sentence trail off, as if unfinished words were softer than the truth. But in the silent first-class cabin, that unfinished sentence dropped like a weight, sharp and painful. Eleanor spoke slowly, clearly, strongly. "You mean you don't often see someone like me sitting here?" A question that needed no answer, because everyone in that cabin had already heard it. A chair shifted distantly. A middle-aged businessman flinched. They knew this moment was no longer a simple misunderstanding. This was the first time they had witnessed Eleanor Walker speak. Melissa swallowed. "That's not what I meant." "What you meant," Eleanor interrupted, "is already very clear." The camera shifts to Natalie. The slow burn of anger in her eyes, not explosive, not reckless, but smouldering the most dangerous kind. Melissa tried to regain control. "I only wanted to be sure. These seats cost a lot, and many customers get confused." Natalie let out a small laugh, icy sharp. "My grandmother has never been confused, and you just made the biggest mistake of your day." Melissa blinked, confused. Most people were confused when standing in front of someone whose power existed without needing to be displayed. A figure appeared at the end of the cabin. Chief Flight Attendant James Bolton stopped when he saw the scene. His face shifted when he recognized Eleanor. The wrinkles from 20 years in the industry stretched into shock. He knew exactly who she was. The woman Aerovista was preparing to invest in a multi-billion-dollar funding package. The woman whose single speech could move an airline stock price in one morning. The woman the aviation industry called quiet power. But Melissa didn't know, and that ignorance made the moment dangerous. James rushed forward. "Ms. Walker, we sincerely apologize if there was any." Eleanor turned to him. The eyes of someone who had lived long enough to recognize sincerity fear and attempts to cover for another's wrongdoing. "You don't need to apologize for her," she said. "The person who insulted me is still standing here." The camera zooms in on Melissa's face, from cold to pale, from pale to rattled shrinking inside her fragile layer of defensiveness. James tried to regain control. "Ms. Hart, please." "If you intend to cover for her," Eleanor continued, her voice low, but strong enough to mute the entire cabin. "Stop right now." Outside the window, the engines roared to life, a perfect soundtrack to a confrontation swelling in scale. The pace quickened. The cabin's heartbeat quickened. Melissa's breath grew shallow. A passenger in the front row glanced sideways, half shocked, half fearful. Another locked their phone screen but kept staring. No one knew that what was about to happen would ignite a shockwave that would shake the aviation industry. No one knew the woman accused of being in the wrong seat was capable of dismantling an airline with one speech. No one knew the tiny insult delivered in their first-class cabin. The phrase, "You don't belong here," was about to become the opening line of a revolution. Eleanor looked at Melissa one final time. Her eyes held no anger, no break, no tremor. Only one thing remained: judgment, a judgment history had owed her far too long. And then, with a voice deep as a warning drum, she said, "You just targeted the wrong woman." That moment, silent, heavy, cold, marked the point of no return for the entire flight. And for Aerovista Airlines. Natalie sensed the air change the moment Melissa stepped back half a pace, as if the cabin had just shed a layer of disguise and revealed its true face. Discomfort seeped from Melissa's eyes like the sharp smell of bleach hitting metal, spreading into the luxury of first class, where everything normally ran smooth and quiet. But today, that quiet was struggling against something growing inside it, the truth. Eleanor sat down, slowly controlled, composed, but inside her was a storm compressed over decades. Her suit was perfectly pressed, her posture, straight, her hands resting neatly on the armrests. Nothing in her expression showed anger, but it was precisely that silence that made the cabin feel as heavy as a fuel tank about to ignite. Natalie sat beside her, clicking on the small camera hidden in her jacket, her gaze sharp as a blade wrapped in silk. She knew moments like this were always twisted into a simple misunderstanding unless there was proof. She knew the words of a woman of color, no matter how accomplished, could still be diluted or dismissed without images to anchor them. She knew because she had grown up listening to dinner table stories, hearing her grandmother recount doors closed in her face because of a surname, a skin tone, a distrustful glance. Melissa returned with a tray of hot towels, but stopped immediately when she saw Eleanor's eyes lift toward her. She inhaled sharply, forcing her cold attitude into an awkward friendliness, but the expression was thin as paper. "A hot towel for you, ma'am," she said, her voice bending into a reluctant politeness. Eleanor did not lift a hand. She simply looked at her. Her eyes were not warm or outraged, but freezing like an unbroken sheet of ice beneath which a violent sea churned. I do not need that Eleanor said, her voice low, but clear enough for those nearby to look up. I need you to treat me with the same respect as every other passenger. The words dropped into the cabin, bounced off the walls, and reflected through the faces watching. Some people avoided Eleanor's gaze, as if avoiding something they knew they did not have the courage to confront. Melissa hesitated, then forced a smile. "I was just doing my job. I have been observing that job," Natalie cut in her voice, sharp as a surgical line. "You very clearly treat passengers differently. You did not help my grandmother with her luggage, but you helped 3 others afterward. You asked if she was in the wrong seat, but addressed every white man around us by name, and you made a remark that judged her income." Melissa froze for a second. Natalie hadn't raised her voice, but every word landed like a hammer driving the final nail. James Bolton reappeared looking anxious and distressed. He glanced at Natalie, at Eleanor, then at Melissa. The truth was obvious without anyone needing to say it. "Miss Walker," he began, but Eleanor raised her hand slightly, just enough to silence him. "Mr. Bolton," Eleanor said, her eyes still on Melissa. "I have lived long enough to recognize disrespect when it stands right in front of me, and I no longer have the time to pretend I do not see it." Natalie watched her, feeling her heart tighten slightly. Not from anger, but from understanding the exhaustion behind those words. A lifetime of exhaustion. Melissa tried to recover. "If you feel offended," I feel Eleanor tilted her head, her gaze peeling away the layers of excuse. "You did not make me feel anything. You revealed exactly how you look at me, and how you believe I do not belong here." A collective breath moved through the cabin, not loud, but sharp. Everyone realized the situation had long passed the boundary of a minor incident. James lowered his voice, trying to regain control. "I promise I will report," Natalie looked directly at him. "Mr. Bolton, we will report it ourselves, and not only within the airline." He went, still confused, not realizing that her words were the start of a wave. The phone in Natalie's hand buzzed softly. 3 new notifications, a message from her legal partner, a note from a journalist she had worked with, a ping from a social advocacy group she supported. With one tap, this entire event could spread beyond anything Aero Vista could contain. Eleanor tilted her head toward Natalie without speaking. They shared the kind of unspoken understanding only people fighting the same battle across generations could have. Eleanor turned back to Melissa. "You will have to answer for this. Not to me. To an entire system you have just exposed." Melissa swallowed. She did not fully understand, but something deep in her instincts told her this was no longer within her control. The cabin vibrated gently, as the plane taxied toward the runway, but that tremor was nothing compared to the tension curling through the luxurious space. Nearby men tried to look down at their newspapers, but their eyes discreetly watched Eleanor as if staring into the forming eye of a storm. James stepped back, realizing the authority in this moment did not belong to him nor to Melissa. Power was shifting slowly, but surely like a rising tide, pulling the sand out from beneath unsteady feet. Eleanor placed her hand on the armrest, light, steady, unshaking. "Natalie," she said without looking over, but loud enough to be heard, "prepare yourself." Natalie nodded. "Yes. We will not be silent this time." The words were small but heavy, like a trigger being pulled. A switch flipped, a door opened, a massive force began to move, and from the stillness of first-class Aerovista Airline's flight became the accidental starting point of an upheaval no one in that cabin could begin to imagine. But Eleanor knew. Natalie knew. They had just witnessed the defining moment when injustice targeted the wrong person, and what awaited ahead would no longer be an incident. It would be a consequence. The leather bag at Eleanor's feet, still not placed in the overhead bin, sat there like living evidence of Melissa's deliberate disregard. A small object, yet it carved a scratch into the polished glass facade of first class, reflecting a truth far larger than itself. Each time Melissa walked past, Natalie caught something in Eleanor's eyes' remembrance. Not anger, not hurt, just remembrance, the way someone collects data, sorting it into layers, categories, fragments of a system long broken. 5 minutes passed. 3 other passengers had their bags lifted for them, each receiving a smile Eleanor had never been offered. And then Eleanor's voice sounded. "I am still waiting." Not loud, not urgent, but enough to pull every gaze toward her. Melissa turned back her face, stiff with annoyance, as if Eleanor were inconveniencing her. "I will assist you shortly," she said, before immediately tending to a young man settling into seat 3C without granting Eleanor a single glance. Natalie tilted her head, eyes narrowing her fingers, tightening subtly around her phone. She recognized this pattern. Selective service, conditional courtesy, discrimination wrapped in thin layers of "we are busy" or "we have procedures." She had seen it her entire life, but this time it was directed at the person she respected most. Eleanor leaned back into her seat, exhaling slowly. She saw it clearly in Melissa's eyes, an unguarded evaluation, a small arrogance sharp as a razor. It reminded her of banks that once denied her loans because her profile was not suitable of meetings where she was mistaken for an assistant, simply because no one believed the only woman of color in the room could be the chief executive officer. 73 years of life, and the world still recycled the same tired script. Natalie spoke first. She has waited long enough. Her voice was straight decisive, like a blade slicing through the air. Melissa turned, irritation fully exposed. "I am assisting everyone in order." "Put my grandmother's bag away," Natalie said, her stare fixed on Melissa. No debate, no apology. Simply the statement of what was right. Melissa approached her movements, half reluctant, half defiant. She grabbed Eleanor's bag, but as she lifted it, her wrist twisted slightly, an unnecessary motion Natalie spotted instantly. The bag slipped. The champagne glass on the nearby tray tipped. The sound of crystal striking metal pierced the cabin an instant before golden liquid spilled downward in a cold, quick slash. Champagne splattered across Eleanor's suit, running from her shoulder, down her sleeve, soaking into the expensive fabric like a slow-spreading wound. Gasps erupted around them. A few passengers shot to their feet. A man lifted his hand to his mouth, and Melissa, for a fraction of a second, before masking it with feigned panic, revealed something unmistakable satisfaction. Eleanor did not move. She did not look down at the champagne. She did not inhale sharply to contain anger. She simply sat there straight, calm, her eyes locked on Melissa, and suddenly the cabin felt so silent they could hear the engines outside the wing. I'm so sorry." Melissa lifted her hands to her mouth, her voice trembling artificially. "I did not mean to. It was an accident." Eleanor spoke, her voice low, clear and hard as stone. "Bring me a towel. One sentence. A command. No emotion, no tremor." Melissa handed her a tiny cocktail napkin, flimsy as paper. This should be enough. A horrified laugh escaped someone further down the cabin. No one claimed it, but everyone understood she was mocking her. She believed dark fabric could hide stains, hide humiliation, hide truth, but nothing could hide this moment. Natalie angled her phone. The camera captured everything: Melissa's face, the champagne stain, the useless napkin. She said nothing. She did not need to. Melissa's contempt had spoken for itself. A man across the aisle stood. "This is unbelievable. This is first class." He held out his white cloth towel for Eleanor, a small gesture, but one that framed right and wrong more sharply than any argument. Eleanor accepted it. "Thank you." Her voice softened, yet its weight silenced everyone. Melissa stepped back, her face pale, but her eyes still carrying a flicker of defiance. "You should be more careful. Things like that sometimes happen because passengers are not used to the first-class environment." The cabin shattered. A wave of outrage rippled from row to row, from front to back, reaching the cabin door. Natalie rose. No shouting. No shaking. She simply stood tall, her gaze sharp as a blade that had dissected many acts of discrimination in courtrooms. "You just publicly blamed the victim, and you just insulted my grandmother in front of the entire cabin." Melissa retreated half a step. Eleanor placed the towel down. She stood, champagne still streaked along her sleeve. "Ms. Hart," she said, her voice unraised, yet every word struck like a hammer. "You did not slip. You did not make a mistake. You revealed exactly how you see me. And I have taken note." In that moment, every camera in the cabin, visible or hidden, pointed at one person, Eleanor Walker. Not because of the stain on her suit, but because of the power awakening behind it. A woman had been stained, but she had not been diminished. A woman had been disrespected, but that disrespect would become the leverage that would shake an entire system. Natalie looked at her, fire in her eyes. Not the fire of rage, but of confirmation. They had crossed the point of no return. Eleanor looked directly at Melissa. "I will not let this pass like all the other times in my life." That sentence, like lightning cracking through the quiet of first class, was the signal of the storm's beginning. A storm Aerovista had never prepared to face. Eleanor remained standing, champagne still streaked across her sleeve, yet her absolute composure pressed the entire first-class cabin beneath an invisible weight. She did not need to shout. She did not need to show anger. It was her unwavering calm that made everyone shiver, the kind of stillness found only at the eye of a storm, where the wind pauses just long enough to prepare for devastation. Natalie leaned slightly forward, her gaze sweeping through the cabin, observing every reaction, every held breath, every person pretending not to stare, yet unable to look away from what was unfolding. The polished, quiet luxury of first class had suddenly turned into a stage where truth stood naked under the brightest spotlight. No music, no dramatic lighting, but something far more powerful: exposure. James Bolton approached, and the look in his eyes was no longer that of a cabin supervisor, but of a man watching disaster unfold in slow motion. He knew this moment would spread. He knew it would move beyond the cabin, beyond the flight, beyond the airline itself. He knew because he had seen it before. The moment a small mistake magnified by the wrong attitude transforms into a tidal wave when directed at the wrong person. And Eleanor Walker was absolutely the wrong person to provoke. "Miss Walker, I want to apologize on behalf of James," began. "You are not the one who spilled champagne on me," Eleanor replied, cutting him off. "Not cold, not harsh, simply factual. And I do not accept apologies delivered on someone else's behalf." Melissa swallowed hard, her breath tightening. She glanced around desperately for an ally, but the cabin was filled with averted eyes, people unwilling to stand beside someone who had dug her own grave. No one wanted to share the fallout of provoking a woman whose mere words could influence the airline's stock value. And then, in a moment of rattled panic, Melissa uttered the one sentence that destroyed her completely. "You are overreacting. This is just a small accident for a passenger like you." The words cracked through the cabin like glass, breaking sharp and deadly. No one breathed. No one moved. No one blinked. Natalie shot to her feet. "What did you just say?" Melissa stepped back, but the words had already escaped irreversible. "I mean, passengers like her often—" Eleanor turned her head slowly, like a camera lens, rotating toward the guilty party. "Like me, the air froze solid." "Do you mean people of color, older passengers? People you assume cannot afford this seat?" Each question dropped like steel hitting stone. Melissa said nothing. She could not say anything. Natalie raised her phone. "Everyone in this cabin just heard you. Do you understand what that means?" James inhaled sharply. "Ms. Hart, she should stop talking before she buries her career any deeper." Natalie said, her tone icy. "Although it may already be too late." Eleanor sat again, but not with the posture of someone enduring humiliation. She sat like a silent judge, preparing a verdict. She took the white towel offered by the man across the aisle and gently wiped the champagne from her sleeve. Roosevelt once said, "Speak softly, but carry a big stick." Eleanor did not need the stick. Her presence alone was enough. Natalie scanned the cabin once more. She saw phones lifted discreetly, eyes filled with anger, eyes filled with gratitude, eyes filled with fear. Everyone recognized that this was no longer a private dispute between a passenger and a flight attendant. This was a societal moment. A moment reflecting a deeper truth. A moment that could only happen when someone believed they had the right to decide who belonged in which space. And when that belief collided with a woman who had spent her entire life dismantling the limits society tried to impose upon her. Melissa tried to retreat, but Eleanor lifted her eyes. "Ms. Hart," she said, "I will ask once, and you will answer honestly." The sound of the aircraft engines outside seemed to fade, as if the world leaned in to listen. "Why did you believe I did not belong in this seat?" The question was not loud, but it pierced the cabin, slicing through Melissa, slicing through the people pretending to type on laptops. A long moment passed. No one dared to fill it. Melissa opened her mouth, but only broken breath emerged. Eleanor continued, "Be honest. This entire cabin is watching, and history values evidence." As if released from a silence held too long, Natalie stepped forward. Her voice carried no anger, only the sharp precision of someone exposing the anatomy of prejudice, of mindset, of system. "You believed my grandmother did not belong here," Natalie said, "because you think this seat defines a person's worth. And you judged the wrong woman." Melissa burst into tears, but tears rescued no one now. No one stepped in. No one defended her, because everyone recognized these were tears born from shifting power, not awakening conscience. James placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm. "Miss Hart, please move to another section." Melissa backed away, her steps unsteady, and only when the cabin door closed behind her did the murmurs explode like hail against glass. Natalie returned to her grandmother. "Are you all right?" Eleanor did not look at her. She looked straight ahead with the eyes of someone who would no longer accept the role of the victim. "No, Eleanor," said her voice low but sharp as a blade. "But they are about to be." And in that instant, the balance of power in the cabin flipped entirely. Not because Eleanor was angry, but because she had chosen not to be silent ever again. Aerovista Airlines had provoked the single woman capable of bringing an entire company to its knees, and the undercurrent had just begun to rise. The aircraft vibrated lightly as it pushed back from the gate. But that tremor was nothing compared to the tension tightening around Eleanor. The cold, drying streak of champagne on her sleeve had become a mark, as if someone had tried to etch a diminishing message onto her. What they did not know was that every mark imposed on Eleanor across 73 years had become a lever that lifted her higher. Today was no different. Natalie replayed the video on her phone, scrolling through each captured frame. Melissa's expression when she let the glass fall, the fleeting flash of satisfaction, the useless cocktail napkin, the phrase, "like her." Every detail crisp, undeniable. Evidence was never something to argue about. Evidence simply needed to be placed in the right hands at the right moment in front of the right person. Footsteps approached. It was the man seated across the aisle, the one who had offered Eleanor the white towel. He leaned closer, his voice soft but weighted. "I am willing to serve as a witness if you need one." Eleanor looked at him, her eyes softening half a degree enough to acknowledge gratitude without diminishing the rising force within her. "I appreciate it." No wasted words, no softening of posture. Eleanor remained composed, the kind of composure that made others shiver. James Bolton returned his expression stretched tight, like reins pulled too hard. He glanced at the cabin, saw 3 phones still recording, saw the expectant eyes, saw the thing every airline feared most, the moment a story slips beyond control. Ms. Walker-James said, his voice strained but polite. "I want to assure you that we are addressing," Natalie cut him off. "Mr. Bolton, from the moment Ms. Hart questioned my grandmother's seat, your airline has addressed nothing." James stiffened. No rebuttal. Natalie was right. A service system only functions properly when it wants to. And today it had chosen the wrong side. Eleanor placed her hand on the armrest and turned directly to James. "Mr. Bolton, I do not need special treatment. I only need the respect any customer deserves." "Yes, I understand." James swallowed. "We will report this incident to upper management." "And I—" "Not an incident," Eleanor interrupted. "A pattern?" James stopped. "A pattern. A recurring pattern of behavior. This is not the first time you have seen something like this, is it?" Eleanor asked, not letting him escape. Questions about seats, selective smiles. accidental mishaps that only seemed to happen to certain passengers. James faltered. He could not deny it yet. He could not admit it either. Anyone who had worked long enough knew there were things never written in reports, but seen by everyone. Natalie turned her screen toward him. Did you know that in the past 5 years, Aerovista has had 19 complaints related to first-class discrimination, and 3 of those directly involved Melissa Hart? James's eyes widened. How did you? Legal information. Public, and provided by someone who believed my grandmother would not let this story vanish like the previous ones. Eleanor looked at James, and in her gaze was not anger, but moral judgment. Have you ever reported these behaviors? James remained silent. No denial, no excuse. Silence, and silence was the answer. The aircraft increased power as it moved onto the runway, but in the cabin everyone could hear the heartbeat of a system cracking. The entire flight felt it. The balance of power had shifted. A woman had champagne spilled on her. A flight attendant had discriminated. An airline had allowed it. Small issues if they happened to someone else. But today it all happened to Eleanor Walker, and that turned a simple incident into the sign of something far larger. Eleanor tilted her head, looking out the window. Light reflected off the champagne stain, like a streak of cold metal. "Mr. Bolton," she said, without looking at him, yet making him straighten as though standing before a judge. "Do you know who I am?" James hesitated. "I know your name, and I believe I know your position." "No," Eleanor said, still gazing out at the opening sky. "You do not. No one at your airlines does, and that is why you believed you could treat me this way." Natalie's heart rate rose. She knew what was coming, the revelation that could not be undone, the pivot that would change everything. Eleanor turned back her eyes, cutting through the air like a blade slicing ice. "Mr. Bolton, I am the person your executive board is trying to secure for a $2 billion investment." Every breath in the cabin stopped. James turned pale. 2 passengers leaned forward. The man with the white towel nearly dropped his drink. Eleanor continued, her voice deep, slow, and powerful. "And today on your own flight, your own crew has shown me exactly why that investment should never happen." The air trembled not from turbulence, but from the force of that sentence, a sentence capable of collapsing an airline if she wished. James opened his mouth but produced no sound. Nothing he could say would stop the truth from advancing. Natalie locked her phone, her eyes bright with recognition, not joy but certainty. They had crossed the point of no return. Eleanor leaned back into her seat, her gaze fixed ahead, as if she could already see Aerovista's future breaking apart or rebuilding, depending on the choices they made next. Her final words plunged the cabin into absolute silence. "You wanted to prove your professionalism to me. Good. Today you have proven the opposite." And from that moment on, no one in the cabin believed this was a small matter. This was the beginning of a verdict, one aimed not at Melissa alone, but at the entire system for which she had become the spark that ignited a storm. The aircraft lifted from the runway, its metal frame trembling lightly, like a living creature trying to balance itself in mid-air. But the strongest tremor was not in the plane, it was in the power structure inside the first-class cabin. It was shifting, tilting toward the woman who had stayed silent for far too long, and was now awakening the full weight of who she was. Eleanor did not look down at her stained suit, did not touch the champagne mark, did not care whether the dark fabric could hide the damage. Because to her, that champagne was not an accident. It was evidence, a physical symbol of prejudice laid bare in front of dozens of witnesses. Natalie scanned the social media reactions rapidly. The video had already spread beyond close friends, beyond the legal community, beyond people she personally knew. It was being shared by major accounts, the kind that waited for the moment. A system exposed its own rotten core to the public. "It is blowing up," Natalie said quietly to Eleanor. "Let it blow," Eleanor replied, her voice not a whisper, but a soft command. "They need to see." Natalie watched her with deep respect and a hint of sorrow. Not because Eleanor had been insulted, but because she knew moments like this forced Eleanor to confront memories she rarely spoke of, wounds that never fully healed. James Bolton returned for the third time, his face tight with the realization that this situation was far beyond his control. "Ms. Walker, the captain, wants to know if you wish to file a formal report now." "When we land, I will report it," Eleanor answered without turning her head. "Not to your captain, to your CEO." James swallowed hard. Since Eleanor had revealed who she was, he had barely been able to look her in the eye. He felt the shift in power, the way one feels changes in air pressure, invisible but absolutely real. We will prepare whatever you need," he said, stumbling over his words. Natalie did not spare him. "Prepare yourselves, because from this moment on, everything you do will be recorded, and every action will be examined down to the last detail." James nodded stiffly, retreating like someone being pulled away from a crash site he could neither control nor contain. Another flight attendant, Emily, approached, younger, tense, but filled with genuine concern. She leaned slightly toward Eleanor, her voice soft. "Ms. Walker, I know what happened does not represent our whole team. I am very sorry for what you experienced." Eleanor looked at her, a gaze so deep that Emily momentarily froze, as if Eleanor could see through her. "What is your name?" Eleanor asked. "Emily, ma'am. Emily, an apology only has value when the person offering it understands what they are apologizing for." Emily tightened her hands and inhaled. "I am sorry you were treated unfairly. And I am sorry I did not step in earlier." Eleanor nodded gently. "That is the correct answer." Emily bowed her head and stepped back, her hand still clenched but her expression determined. Not out of fear, but because she understood this was a moment when silence would make her complicit. The plane reached cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign dimmed, the cabin settled, but it was not the peaceful settling of a normal first-class flight. It was the taut stillness of water before a storm. Natalie opened her tablet. The first 30 seconds of the video reached 50,000 views. It is climbing fast. That number will double before we reach California. Eleanor did not smile. She did not look pleased. She simply closed her eyes for a single second, a moment, where her exhaustion showed, a moment Natalie rarely saw. "Are you tired?" Natalie asked. "No," Eleanor said, opening her eyes and straightening again. "I am focused." A quiet breath escaped a nearby passenger, not from discomfort, but from the dawning realization that they were witnessing a historical moment, not a spilled glass of champagne. A woman behind them leaned forward. "Ms. Walker, I just want to say, I support you. And I believe it is time someone spoke the truth. So many people have been forced to endure." Eleanor turned slightly, her eyes softening half a degree. "Thank you. But I am not speaking for myself. I am speaking for everyone." Natalie nodded, her smile knowing. That is what they cannot understand. They think this is about bad service. But you see the whole system, I see it because I have lived inside it for too long, Eleanor replied. Her gaze drifted forward, as if she could see beyond the passengers, beyond the cabin, beyond the metal skin of the plane itself, toward the horizon, where every story reaches its breaking point. Natalie, she said without looking over, begin activating the network. Natalie lifted her phone. Who first, all of them? The answer was quiet but fierce, like the moment a battle is declared. Natalie sent the first messages to civil rights organizations, to discrimination watchdog groups, to investigative journalists, to federal attorneys, to 3 Aerovista board members she had encountered before. A domino effect began moving. Natalie placed her phone down. You know this will stun them. Eleanor stared ahead, completely steady. They should be stunned. They have relied on silence for far too long. The plane trembled lightly, as if responding to her words. And though no one in the cabin knew it yet, they had just entered the moment that future news articles would call the point of no return. Eleanor looked out the window, the dried champagne leaving a faint, pale mark on her sleeve. Today, she said, will not end on this plane. It will end somewhere else. Where Natalie asked, Eleanor turned her eyes, shining with the steel of a woman who had carried entire eras on her shoulders. In the CEO's boardroom at Aerovista. And from that moment on, the airline's fate no longer belonged to them. It belonged to the woman they had spilled champagne on, and they had no idea what kind of storm was coming. The aircraft lifted from the runway, its metal body trembling lightly like a creature trying to steady itself in mid-air. But the strongest tremor was not in the airplane. It was in the power structure inside the first-class cabin. It was shifting, tilting toward the woman who had stayed silent for far too long and was now awakening the full weight of herself. Eleanor did not look at her stained suit, did not touch the champagne mark, did not care whether the dark fabric could hide the blemish. Because in her mind, that champagne stain was not an accident. It was evidence, a physical symbol of prejudice, exposed in front of dozens of witnesses. Natalie watched the digital storm spreading like a wildfire, meeting high winds. Every passing minute the numbers rose, first tens of thousands of views, then hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of comments. New hashtags formed with the chaotic but unmistakable logic of social media, the kind that once they latch onto a system cannot be undone by any apology. Eleanor sat upright, eyes locked forward, not blinking once. She did not need to watch the video, did not need to track social media, did not need to see the unfolding reaction. She knew. She felt the weight of each share, the way she felt gravity pull against the aircraft's wings, because for the first time in many years, the world was witnessing something it always ignored, how systems treat people they assume, cannot do anything about it. Another flight attendant passed by. Not Melissa, not James, but a younger woman with small stature and eyes filled with genuine concern. She quietly handed Eleanor a glass of water. Eleanor accepted it with a slight nod. No words. But Natalie saw the gesture. She saw the divide, those who understood, and those who chose not to, those who learned immediately, and those who feared only consequences. Grandma Natalie murmured, checking another notification. CNN is preparing to reach out. Eleanor responded, like someone who had heard this her whole life. Do not respond. MSNBC as well. Do not respond. Natalie studied her for a long second. You do not want to speak publicly. Not yet. Natalie understood instantly. Eleanor's voice was not the voice of someone who needed the crowd. It was the voice of someone who controlled the crowd, someone who understood the value of timing, someone who knew that a single, well-placed sentence could end an entire corporation. A passenger 2 rows behind leaned forward, her voice low but clear. "Ms. Walker, I have never seen anyone remain this calm. I just want to say, you are remarkable." Eleanor did not turn. Calm is not a privilege. It is the discipline of someone who has witnessed far too many similar moments. The sentence fell into the cabin like a pebble into a still lake, not creating loud waves, but sinking deep, pulling everyone's thoughts with it. They looked at Eleanor differently now. Not as a victim, not as a mistreated passenger, but as someone who would decide how far this would go. The plane continued to fly smoothly, but the cabin was anything but smooth. The space felt divided, the quiet gravity around Eleanor and Natalie, and everything else tense, unsettled, waiting for a verdict no one dared predict. James returned again, his eyes red from stress, still attempting to steady his voice. "Ms. Walker, I have received a message from the ground. The executive board has been informed. They want me to convey their personal apology to you." Eleanor turned to face him fully for the first time. "Mr. Bolton, when a system fails at the top levels, apologies mean nothing. They are only a delay of accountability." James lowered his head. He had no response. He understood now, and he was consumed by a shame that required no accusation. Natalie rested her hand on the armrest, her eyes thoughtful. "Grandma, we have everything. The video, witnesses, historical data. The network is active. We can strike back as soon as we land." Eleanor shook her head. "We do not strike back. We do not waste time on small retaliation. We fix the entire system." And when she said that, the man across the aisle suddenly understood what many others had in this situation was not about revenge. Not a scandal, not compensation. This was a campaign to restructure an industry. "You already have a plan?" Natalie asked. "No." Eleanor replied, her eyes gleaming like steel in the cabin lights. "I have had a plan for a long time. Today is simply the moment to activate it." Natalie froze, not in surprise, but in recognition. She should have known. A woman like Eleanor never entered an industry without seeing its cracks, and a woman like Eleanor never ignored a crack if she had the power to repair it. "What will we release?" Natalie asked. "Not today," Eleanor said, still watching the deep blue sky rolling beneath the aircraft's wings. "Tomorrow, at the conference." No one else in the cabin knew what conference she meant. But those who did grew pale. Erwolster was waiting for Eleanor's keynote address to determine the direction of future investments. And now she was no longer a speaker. She was a threat. James whispered, almost involuntarily, "They will panic when they learn you are on this flight." Eleanor lifted her head. "Have they panicked yet?" James swallowed. "Yes." Then Eleanor said, "This is only the beginning." The cabin fell into silence. The silence of a storm as its eye grows before turning destructive. Natalie leaned closer, her voice low but electric. "Grandma, what will you do when we land?" Eleanor closed her eyes for a single second, then opened them, her gaze sharp and serene, like a blade forged over decades. "We step off the plane," she said, "and let them see exactly the kind of person they underestimated." Natalie inhaled deeply, feeling as if she stood before a vast cliff, not to look down, but to watch others fall into the abyss they created. Eleanor continued, "No shouting, no chaos, no petty retaliation." "So what will we do?" Natalie asked. Eleanor kept her spine straight, her hand resting lightly on the seat, her voice ringing out like cold bronze. We will make the entire aviation industry look at itself in the mirror." In that moment in the quiet cabin, everything fell into place, and everyone understood what was coming was not anger but judgment, not outrage but transformation, the beginning of the day when silent power finally decided to speak. A soft ding echoed through the cabin, signaling the plane was entering a stable cruising phase. But for Aerovista, nothing was stable anymore, because on this flight they had activated the most formidable weapon possible, a woman who had nothing left to prove, only something left to fix. The aircraft settled into the soft light of cruising altitude, but inside the first-class cabin, the air tightened like wind, gathering before a storm. No one spoke loudly. No one made noise. Yet the silence carried the weight of questions unspoken, as if every passenger was waiting for what came next. Natalie tilted her screen toward Eleanor. "The footage is climbing into the top 3 nationwide trends." Eleanor did not look at it. She did not need numbers to know the scale of the shockwave spreading outward. One video at the right moment, involving the right person under the right circumstances, could turn an entire industry upside down. She had seen it in business. She had used it in politics. And now she was letting it happen again, but this time not for herself. For everyone like her, those who had been insulted in silence for years. A figure stopped beside their row, the man who had spoken up first, his face now more serious, more deliberate. "Ms. Walker," he said quietly, "I used to work with a law firm that handled many discrimination cases. I know you do not need assistance, but if you want me to be a witness, I will." "Publicly?" Eleanor nodded once, a small gesture, yet it conveyed full gratitude. Natalie watched as he returned to his seat. "It is rare," she said, "to see someone take our side so quickly." "No," Eleanor replied. "It is what happens when people see the truth in the light." The cabin shook gently as the plane adjusted altitude. The overhead lights shifted to a warm tone, but that warmth could not pierce the tension stretching across the space. A young flight attendant walked past cautiously, as though stepping through the aftermath of an explosion she did not cause but feared being blamed for. Natalie turned to Eleanor. "When we land, they will try to put us in a private room, away from the press." Eleanor answered immediately, her voice calm but edged with steel. "We will not enter any private room." Natalie nodded. She had anticipated that. "So you want them to see you walk out publicly?" "No," Eleanor said, staring ahead. "We will let them see exactly what they tried to hide." An older passenger leaned forward, speaking softly. "I saw the video. I am very sorry for what happened to you." Eleanor did not say thank you. Instead, she said something no one in the cabin expected. "Do not be sorry for me. Be sorry for those who do not have a camera." Natalie felt a chill run down her spine. Her grandmother always spoke like this, simple, tight, and cutting straight to the core. No debate needed. No explanation required. Just the truth laid bare. And that truth carved absolute silence into the cabin. James Bolton returned once again, but this time he moved slower, like someone approaching bad news from a doctor. "Ms. Walker," he said, his voice lower. "I have been informed that the regional director is waiting for you at the gate. They also asked me to prepare a private exit to ensure your privacy." Natalie let out a small laugh. Privacy, or avoiding cameras? James exhaled sharply. "I am only following instructions, and that Eleanor said is exactly the problem. People become so used to following instructions that they forget to ask whether those instructions are right." Natalie looked at her. You are not going through the private exit. No, Natalie. We will walk through the public concourse, where everyone can see, where truth walks into the light. James swallowed, clearly expecting this answer, yet hoping somehow for the opposite. I will have to inform them. You do that? Eleanor replied. They have 3 hours to prepare for their mistake. Natalie turned to her grandmother, eyes bright. You are planning the first step. No, Eleanor said the first step began the moment the champagne touched my sleeve. And at that exact moment, the aircraft shook lightly a small turbulence. But to those watching Eleanor, it did not feel like turbulence. It felt like a shift in power. Subtle, but signaling a storm. Natalie scrolled through her contacts. I will send the briefing to Marcus first. He will need to assemble the PR team and the legal team. Eleanor closed her eyes not to rest, but to gather every memory rushing back to her, the times she had been mistaken for staff, the times she had been asked to prove her own position, the times she had been dismissed in conference rooms full of white men. And now, even in the most expensive cabin on a commercial airline, she saw the same pattern repeat. But this time was different. This time she carried the strength of 73 years of experience. This time she was no longer in a position to endure. This time she had an entire system ready to respond on her behalf. Natalie glanced at the dried champagne on her sleeve. Do you want to change your jacket before we land? Eleanor opened her eyes. No. Natalie smiled slightly. I figured. Because this stain, Eleanor said, is not my shame. It is their truth. The cabin fell silent for a few seconds, as everyone realized this battle was not waiting for the plane to land. It was happening now in silence, in glances, in the shifting balance of power right in front of them. Natalie leaned closer, her voice low but electric. Grandma, we have 3 hours until landing. They will not be ready. Eleanor looked out the window at the deep blue sky stretching endlessly beneath the aircraft. Her gaze no longer belonged to the cabin. It belonged to what would happen afterward. No, she said slowly. When this plane lands, they will not just be unprepared. They will realize they seated the wrong person in the wrong seat at the wrong moment. And that was the moment everyone in the cabin understood. When Eleanor stepped off the plane, it would not be only a flight attendant facing consequences. An airline, a board of executives, a system, all stood before the judgment of a woman they had misjudged from the very first look. The sound of the landing gear touching the runway echoed like a drum roll, announcing a battle that had been silently prepared over 3 hours in the air. As the plane slowed, a thick silence fell over the cabin, not the silence of passengers ready to disembark, but the silence of an audience sensing that history was about to shift. Eleanor unlatched her seatbelt. A small motion, yet the click cut through the waiting air like a blade. Natalie checked her notifications one last time. The CEO is at the gate, along with the PR team, airport security, and a group of journalists. Eleanor showed no surprise. They ran there out of fear, not out of apology. Natalie looked at her. You want them to fear? Eleanor replied, calm as a midnight lake. Fear is the only thing that forces a system to change. The aircraft came to a complete stop. The lights above dimmed. The soft choruses of clicks filled the cabin as seatbelts released. But no one stood. They waited for Eleanor, waiting to see what the woman dismissed at boarding would do upon stepping off. James appeared at the front of the cabin, looking like he had aged several years in the past 3 hours. Ms. Walker, the executive team is asking you to use a private exit. A car is waiting, and they would like to speak with you privately." "No," Eleanor said instantly. "I will walk out through the main gate, the same way every passenger does." James tried to remain steady. "I was instructed to strongly encourage you." Natalie rose, her voice slicing the air. "No one can encourage the truth." Eleanor stepped into the aisle. The dried champagne on her sleeve caught the cabin lights like an exposed wound, a visual accusation, and she did not wipe it away. The cabin door opened. Sound from the jet bridge poured in. Footsteps, hushed voices, camera shutters flickering. Eleanor stepped out first, not slow, not hesitant. Each step carried the force of 7 decades of living, surviving and confronting a world that constantly tested her limits. A corporate representative rushed forward, his face pulled tight. "Ms. Walker, we sincerely, respectfully request you join us in the VIP lounge so we can—" "No," Eleanor cut in. "I will not enter any room whose doors close behind me. I do not need privacy to discuss something that happened publicly." The executive froze, because behind Eleanor, dozens of cameras were already raised, and at that moment, the CEO of the airline, Robert Harlow, appeared. He walked briskly, wearing a strained smile, his eyes carrying the panic of a man who had just been told his company was plummeting without a safety net. "Ms. Walker, this is a terrible misunderstanding. We sincerely apologize for what occurred. You would like to control the narrative," Eleanor said. Her voice did not rise, but it commanded silence from everyone around. "But the narrative is no longer yours." Robert stiffened. Cameras flashed in rapid bursts. Natalie stepped forward, standing beside Eleanor like a legal sentinel. "We recorded everything. The entire cabin witnessed it, and we have at least 4 passengers willing to speak publicly." The COO's face went pale brittle like aircraft glass under hail. "We should speak in private." "You still do not understand," Eleanor said. "The problem is not in a private room. The problem is in the culture you built." Robert swallowed, gripping his tablet like a man holding on to a sinking lifeboat. Eleanor stepped closer, prompting reporters to retreat half a step. "When your employee asked if I was in the wrong seat, that was not a question. It was a statement. When she spilled champagne on me, that was not an accident. It was a message." Then she lifted her wrist slightly so the dried stain caught the light. "And this," she said, "is the most honest report of how your airline treats passengers of color." The crowd erupted into murmurs. Cameras fired non-stop. The CEO inched backward toward security, but Natalie blocked his escape. "Are you aware your airline has received 19 discrimination complaints in the past 5 years, and 3 involve Melissa Hart?" Reporters pivoted instantly. "Mr. Harlow, do you have a comment? Are you aware these complaints were buried? Is it true the flight attendant is the daughter of the board's human resources chair?" Robert went sheet white. Eleanor raised a hand. The noise stopped instantly. "Mr. Harlow," she said, "I did not come here seeking an apology for myself. I came to make your airline finally see itself." His eyes widened. He knew what was coming. Eleanor continued, slow and deliberate, each word landing like a hammer on stone. "Tomorrow at the National Aviation Conference, I will speak about what happened today. And I will speak about the numbers behind it. I will speak about your system." Robert inhaled, sharply trembling. "Ms. Walker, what you are planning will have enormous consequences." Eleanor met his gaze carrying no hatred, only truth. "Not because of me. Because your system created these consequences, I am only bringing light to them." Natalie stepped up her tone, precise as a scalpel. "Prepare yourselves. From this moment on, every action Aerovista takes will be recorded, not for retaliation, for reform." A reporter shouted, "Miss Walker, do you intend to sue the airline?" Eleanor turned toward the lens. "I do not sue for compensation. I sue to force change." In that moment, everyone understood the battle had escalated. No longer a passenger versus a flight attendant. No longer an incident. No longer a viral video. This was a declaration of war on an entire system. Eleanor turned and began walking each step, echoing through the concourse like a stamp of authority. Natalie followed. Journalists surged behind them like a rising tide, and behind them, the CEO stood frozen, a man who had finally realized he had misjudged the one person he should never have misjudged. And the storm had not truly begun. It had only just opened its eyes. The jet bridge exit opened before Eleanor like a stage the flight attendant had unintentionally built, and now every spotlight converged on the woman they had tried to treat as just another passenger. But Eleanor did not simply walk out. She advanced, carrying the presence of someone accustomed to standing before powerful boards of directors, often as the only person in the room capable of silencing them. The press swarmed, but they did not shove or crowd. They held a strange, respectful distance, the kind reserved for someone they did not dare touch carelessly. Eleanor said nothing more. She did not need to. Her footsteps, the champagne stain on her sleeve, and the cold steel of her composure were enough to ignite every question in the minds of those watching. Natalie followed closely, checking messages at rapid speed, as if directing an invisible network tightening around Aerovista by the minute. "Grandma," she murmured, "the company's PR team just released a statement. They are calling this a misunderstanding." Eleanor did not turn. "They call every discriminatory structure a misunderstanding. That is why it lasts so long." Natalie smirked. "They do not realize you had a response planned before the aircraft even touched the ground. They do not realize it because they never believed someone like me could be a threat," Eleanor replied. As they moved into the baggage claim area, whispers spread across the hall like a fast wave. Passengers from Flight 782 began gathering. Some stepped closer to Eleanor. A middle-aged woman, her eyes red with anger on Eleanor's behalf, said softly, "I want to submit a witness statement. I experienced the same thing on a previous flight, but I had no one to stand with me." Eleanor placed a hand on her shoulder. "Now you do." Another man joined in. "Me as well. They once told me I was in the wrong cabin, even though I had a first-class ticket." Natalie quickly recorded names and contacts. "Thank you. This is not just our case. This is for everyone who has ever been dismissed." Eleanor continued forward, her gaze sweeping across the crowded terminal, noticing not only passengers but airport staff looking at her differently. Not with curiosity, not with pity, but with respect. A young employee with brown skin leaned closer and whispered as she passed, "We all know this happens, but none of us have the power to speak up. Thank you for not staying silent." Eleanor paused for 3 seconds, 3 seconds that made the employee's heartbeat stutter. "I speak for those who are not allowed to speak," she said. "And I speak because I have stayed silent for too long." Ahead of them stood a group of individuals in black suits, not reporters, not supporters, but Aerovista's senior leadership team, their faces tense, eyes, anxious posture, stiff as if awaiting judgment. One man stepped forward, polished in appearance, yet with a tremor in his hands. Ms. Walker, we represent the executive board. We want to express Eleanor did not let him finish. You came to save yourselves, not your passengers. The man lowered his voice. We will not deny that. But please allow us the chance to fix this before things spiral out of control. Natalie let out a cold laugh. Too late. Eleanor locked eyes with the executive, and he looked away for half a second, instinctively bowing under the weight of her gaze. You want to fix the system? Eleanor asked. Good. You will begin with a public, unconditional apology, and the immediate suspension of every staff member involved until an independent investigation is complete. We will do that immediately, he said, stumbling over the words. Not enough, Eleanor replied. Aerovista must acknowledge that this was not an isolated incident, but the result of a damaged culture. The man's face went pale. What she demanded, no airline dared to admit openly. Ms. Walker, this will tank the stock price. The stock will fall, Eleanor said, unblinking. But your integrity fell first. The man stood silent, unable to fight back. No one in his group dared to interrupt. Natalie stepped forward and handed him a packet of documents. This is a list of 19 suppressed complaints from the past 5 years, and a list of witnesses ready to speak. If you do not act immediately, we will reveal all of this on stage at tomorrow's conference. The man genuinely trembled now. Please do not destroy us. Eleanor bowed her head slightly. I am not destroying anyone. I am simply shining light where you chose darkness. You will finish the rest yourselves. A heavy silence settled over the group, suffocating enough that everyone felt it. Then Eleanor turned. Natalie walked beside her, whispering, You are not stopping, are you? No, Eleanor said, because this is no longer about us. Then about whom Eleanor looked toward the terminal exit, where hundreds of people walked. People who had once been dismissed, once been asked if they were in the wrong place, once been judged as not worthy of standing in the first-class line of society. It is about everyone ever held back, Eleanor said. And as she stepped out of the baggage claim area, the airport lights shone on the dried champagne stain on her sleeve, or transforming it into a symbol no one would forget. No longer a stain, but the mark of the day. A system began to crack. From the perspective of a specialist in systemic justice, Eleanor's story reveals an undeniable truth. Injustice does not begin with grand actions. It begins with small moments repeated long enough to become culture. True strength does not lie in striking back at an insult, but in the ability to turn that moment into a catalyst that forces an entire industry to examine itself. If you believe that respect is not a privilege, but a fundamental right of every human being, please like and subscribe to help amplify this message, and leave a comment with the phrase, "Stand up," to affirm your voice in this ongoing conversation.